It was a quiet Tuesday morning in the suburbs of Northwood. The kind of morning where, honestly, the biggest news was the city council's debate over new parking meters. But inside Station 12, the air was always thick with anticipation. This was Carter's world, a world of polished chrome, neatly coiled hoses, and the ever-present scent of coffee. Carter was a firefighter, not just any firefighter. He was the one they all looked up to, the one who ran in when every human instinct screamed to run out. He was brave, they said, a hero, they called him. And for years, he had worn that title like a second skin, never once letting the weight of it show. His days were a blur of routine and chaos. One moment, he'd be meticulously checking the pressure gauges on an oxygen tank, his hands steady and sure. The next, the piercing shriek of the station alarm would shatter the calm, and Carter would be the first one in the truck, his face a mask of calm focus. He had saved so many, pulled families from burning homes, freed drivers from mangled cars. He had seen the worst of what life could throw at people, and he had always been the one to offer a steady hand, a reassuring voice in the darkness. He was a beacon of hope in a world that often felt short on it. Back at the station, after the flames were out and the smoke had cleared, he was just Carter, a man with a quick smile and an easy laugh. He'd share stories with the younger recruits, his voice a low rumble that filled the common room. He talked about his wife, Jamie Lynn. He spoke of their quiet life, the home they were building together. To the men and women of Station 12, Carter's life seemed perfect. It was the life they all aspired to, a life of purpose, of love, of simple, honest goodness, a life that seemed as solid and dependable as the man himself. But perfection, as we know, is often just an illusion. And illusions have a way of shattering, sometimes slowly, over time, and sometimes all at once, like glass hit by a stone. Carter, the man who faced down infernos without flinching, was living inside a fragile picture frame. He saw the beautiful image, the smiling wife, the cozy home. He had no idea that a crack was already forming, a tiny, almost invisible fissure that was about to spread and bring his entire world crashing down around him. Because in that perfect picture, someone was holding a stone, and they were getting ready to throw it. Jamie Lynn. The name was always on Carter's lips. She was the other half of his perfect life. They had met at a town picnic, a classic small-town love story. He was the handsome firefighter. She was the charming newcomer with a dazzling smile. Their courtship was a whirlwind. Picnics in the park, long drives through the countryside, late-night talks about their dreams. To everyone who saw them, they were the ideal couple. Carter, the strong and silent hero. Jamie Lynn, the supportive and loving wife. Their home was always filled with laughter, the smell of her baking, and the easy comfort of two people deeply in love. She seemed to adore him. She would pack his lunches for the fire station, always with a little handwritten note tucked inside. "Be safe, my hero," one might read, or "Hurry home to me." When he came home, bone-tired and smelling of smoke, she would be there. A warm meal on the table, a sympathetic ear for the day's troubles. She was his rock, he told everyone, the calm in his often stormy world. She managed their finances, planned their vacations, and took care of all the little details of their life together. Carter trusted her completely. Why wouldn't he? She had given him no reason not to. Their friends saw it too. At barbecues and holiday parties, Jamie Lynn would cling to Carter's arm, her eyes sparkling as she listened to him talk. She was so proud of him, she'd say, so proud of his bravery, his dedication. She spoke of their future, of the children they hoped to have one day. It was a beautiful story they were writing together, a story of love, trust, and shared dreams. No one saw the editor standing in the wings, a red pen in hand, ready to cross out the happy ending and write a much, much darker chapter. The performance was flawless, but behind the dazzling smile, behind the loving gaze, a different story was taking shape, a story that had nothing to do with love, and everything to do with lies. While Jamie Lynn played the part of the devoted wife, her mind was a whirlwind of calculations and cold, hard ambition. The life she shared with Carter wasn't enough. The hero's salary wasn't enough. Carter himself wasn't enough. She wanted more, and she had a plan, a terrible, chilling plan. And the man she shared a bed with, the man who trusted her with his life, was at the very center of it. He was not her partner. He was an obstacle. So what was it? What was the dark secret hiding behind Jamie Lynn's perfect smile? It was something as old as time itself. Greed, pure and simple. The life of a firefighter's wife was comfortable, but it wasn't glamorous. Jamie Lynn craved the glamour. She spent her days scrolling through images of lavish vacations, designer clothes, and expensive cars. She wanted the life she saw on her screen, not the one she was living. And she had discovered a shortcut. A dark and twisted path to the wealth she so desperately desired. It was a path paved with insurance policies. Carter, in his trusting way, had let Jamie Lynn handle all their insurance paperwork. It was just another detail he was happy to leave in her capable hands. And she had been very, very capable. Over the past year, she had quietly taken out multiple life insurance policies on him. Large ones. The kind that pay out millions. Carter had signed the papers without a second thought, assuming they were for their mortgage or retirement. He had no idea that he was signing his own death warrant. The total payout, Jamie Lynn had calculated, would be more than enough to fund her dream life. All she needed was for the policies to be activated. Her motivation was a cold, hard knot of resentment and desire. She had come to see Carter not as her husband, but as a barrier to her happiness. His quiet heroism, the very thing everyone else admired, she saw as a dead-end job with modest pay. His contentment with their simple life felt like a cage. She didn't want simple. She wanted spectacular. And in her warped view of the world, Carter's death was not a tragedy. It was a business transaction, an investment that was about to pay off. She had spent months planning, her mind a cold and methodical machine. The plan itself was deceptively simple. It had to look like an accident, something that could happen to a firefighter, something tragic but believable. She studied Carter's routines, his work schedule, the layout of their home. She researched, she plotted, she waited for the perfect moment. There was no flicker of doubt, no pang of conscience. The woman who wrote "Be safe," my hero on a napkin, was the same woman who was meticulously planning how to ensure he would be anything but safe. The love story was a lie. The real story was about a predator patiently waiting to strike. While Jamie Lynn was weaving her web of deceit, Carter went about his life blissfully unaware. His trust in his wife was absolute, a foundational belief as solid as the ground beneath his feet. He saw her late nights on the computer and assumed she was planning their next vacation. He saw the extra paperwork and figured it was just part of managing their household. The thought that she could be capable of anything other than love and support simply did not exist in his mind. He was a man who saw the good in people, and he saw only good in Jamie Lynn. He would come home from a grueling 24-hour shift, exhausted and emotionally drained, and she would be there, the perfect picture of wifely concern. "You work too hard, honey," she would say, her voice laced with what sounded like genuine worry. She'd rub his shoulders, bring him a cold drink, and listen as he recounted the day's events. He shared everything with her. The triumphs, the fears, the close calls. He was telling his deepest secrets to the one person who was plotting to create his final close call. He was an open book, and she was reading every page, looking for the best way to tear it apart. There were signs, of course. Small things. In hindsight, they would seem like giant, flashing red lights. But at the time, they were just life. A new friend she was texting constantly. A sudden secrecy about her finances, which she explained away as surprise planning. She even started asking strange, hypothetical questions. Questions about the fire station's safety protocols. Questions about equipment failures. Carter, ever the patient teacher, would explain it all to her, proud of her interest in his work. He never once suspected that she wasn't just interested. She was gathering intelligence. The days leading up to her planned accident were, for Carter, just like any other. He kissed her goodbye before his shift, telling her he loved her. She smiled that dazzling smile and told him she loved him too. He went to work, ready to save lives, never imagining that the biggest threat to his own life was sleeping in his bed, using his last name and planning his demise. His trust was a shield he held up against the world, but he had no idea the attack was coming from behind the shield. He was a sheep, being led to the slaughter by the shepherd he trusted most. The day Jamie Lynn chose was a Thursday. Carter was on duty, working a long, grueling 48-hour shift. The plan was set in motion with a simple, anonymous phone call, a call reporting a fire. But not just any fire. It was in a large abandoned warehouse on the industrial outskirts of town. This was a place known to be empty, a place where no one should get hurt. The call was carefully timed, late at night, when the response team would be stretched thin by other minor calls she had also anonymously reported across town. It was a setup designed to isolate Carter's unit. As expected, Station 12 got the call. Carter and his team suited up, the familiar adrenaline kicking in. The warehouse was exactly as described, an old, decaying structure. Flames were already visible, licking out of the second-story windows. But, something felt wrong. The fire was behaving strangely, just too hot, too fast for a building that was supposed to be empty. Carter, as the lead, was the first to enter. He and his partner moved cautiously through the smoke-filled ground floor, their flashlights cutting feeble beams through the oppressive darkness. They were looking for the source, for any trapped victims. That's when it happened. As Carter stepped onto a section of the floor near the main staircase, it gave way with a sickening crack. The floor had been tampered with, sawed through, weakened, and then disguised. Carter plunged into the darkness below, into the building's sub-basement. The fall was brutal. He landed hard, his leg twisting beneath him at an unnatural angle. A sharp, agonizing pain shot through him. He was trapped, injured, and separated from his team. Above him, the fire raged, deliberately fed by accelerants that Jamie Lynn had planted earlier that day. His partner immediately radioed for help. "Mayday, mayday, firefighter down!" The call went out across the airwaves. A frantic rescue operation began. But the fire was a monster, growing with unnatural speed. Debris rained down around Carter as he lay in the darkness, fighting to stay conscious. The heat was becoming unbearable. This was no ordinary fire, it was a trap, a carefully constructed cage of flame and collapsing floors. And he, Carter, the hero of Station 12, was the prey. He didn't know who had done it or why. He only knew he was running out of time and air. The rescue was harrowing. It took nearly an hour for his fellow firefighters to fight their way through the inferno and pull him from the wreckage. Carter was alive, but barely. He was rushed to the hospital with a shattered leg, severe burns, and smoke inhalation. At first, it was treated as a tragic accident, a dangerous job with inherent risks. Carter was hailed as a hero who had narrowly escaped death. Jamie Lynn rushed to the hospital, playing the part of the distraught wife perfectly. Her tears seemed real, her anguish believable. She hovered over his bed, her performance fooling everyone. But not everyone. At the scene of the fire, the investigation had already begun, and the fire marshal, a seasoned veteran named Captain Eva Rostova, immediately saw things that didn't add up. The burn patterns were all wrong. They indicated multiple points of origin, a classic sign of arson. Chemical tests of the debris quickly confirmed her suspicions. They found traces of a sophisticated accelerant, the kind not typically used by amateur arsonists. This wasn't just a fire. It was a professional job. This was an attempt to kill. Captain Rostova started digging. The warehouse had been vacant for years with no electricity or gas hookups. There was no accidental way for a fire of that magnitude to start. So who would want to burn down an empty building? And more importantly, who would want to ensure a firefighter was inside when it went up in flames? She listened to the recording of the anonymous 911 call. The voice was distorted, but it was calm. Too calm. It wasn't the panicked voice of a concerned citizen. It was the cold, steady voice of someone setting a plan in motion. Then came the interviews. Rostova spoke to Carter's crew. They all said the same thing. The fire felt wrong from the start. It was a trap. The weakened floor wasn't an accident of decay, it was deliberate sabotage. The pieces were starting to form a picture, and it was a disturbing one. This wasn't a random act of arson. This was a targeted attack. Someone had wanted a firefighter dead. And not just any firefighter, they had wanted Carter dead. The question that hung in the air, thick as the smoke from the fire, was simple. Who would want to kill a hero? Captain Rostova's investigation turned from the fire itself to Carter's life. Who were his enemies? But Carter didn't have enemies. He was universally loved. Rostova then turned her attention to the one person closest to him, his wife, Jamie Lynn. On the surface, she was the grieving, devoted spouse. But Rostova, trained to see through deception, noticed the little things. The way Jamie Lynn's eyes darted away when asked certain questions. The way her stories about her whereabouts on the night of the fire had tiny, almost imperceptible inconsistencies. It was enough to raise a flag. The first major clue came from the finances. As part of the routine investigation, Rostova's team looked into Carter's insurance. And there it was. Not one, but 3 massive life insurance policies, all taken out or increased within the last 18 months, all with Jamie Lynn as the sole beneficiary. The total payout was staggering, nearly $3 million, and all the paperwork had been handled by her. When asked about it, Jamie Lynn claimed they were Carter's idea, a way to secure their future. But the sheer size of the policies was a huge red flag. It looked less like security and more like a motive. The next piece of the puzzle came from technology. Investigators obtained warrants for Jamie Lynn's phone and computer records, and the truth began to spill out. Her search history was a roadmap of her crime: how to buy fire accelerants without a trace, floor joist cutting patterns, how to disguise your voice on a phone call, and most damningly, they found records of her purchasing the exact type of rare chemical accelerant found at the fire scene, using a prepaid credit card and a fake name. The web of lies was unraveling, thread by thread. The final nail in the coffin was the anonymous tip. Investigators traced the 911 call to a burner phone. But Jamie Lynn had made a mistake. She had turned the burner phone on for a brief moment near her home a week before the fire, and it had pinged a local cell tower. That same tower also registered her personal phone at the exact same time. She was caught. Captain Rostova and her team now had more than suspicion. They had a mountain of evidence. They had motive, means, and opportunity. It was time to arrest the grieving wife. The arrest was quiet. 2 detectives approached Jamie Lynn in the hospital waiting room. There was no drama, no shouting, just a calm, firm "Jamie Lynn, you are under arrest for the attempted murder of your husband." Her mask of grief finally shattered, replaced by a flash of pure cold fury, and then, just as quickly, by a look of utter defeat. The game was over. As she was led away in handcuffs, the news spread like wildfire through the community. The shock was palpable. The perfect wife, the loving spouse, it had all been a lie. A monstrous, calculated performance. The trial was a sensation. The prosecution, led by a sharp and methodical district attorney, laid out the evidence piece by piece: the insurance policies, the internet searches, the burner phone records, the chemical evidence from the fire, the testimony of Captain Rostova and Carter's fellow firefighters. Jamie Lynn's defense tried to paint her as a loving wife, framed by an unknown enemy of Carter's. But there was no enemy. The evidence was overwhelming, an unbreakable chain that linked her directly to the crime. She sat in the courtroom, emotionless, her face a blank slate. Carter, meanwhile, had been slowly, painfully recovering. The physical wounds were healing, but the emotional betrayal was a far deeper injury. He attended every day of the trial, his leg in a cast, his face etched with a sorrow that went beyond physical pain. He had to see it for himself. He had to understand how the woman he had loved and trusted so completely could have plotted to kill him. Watching the evidence unfold was like reliving a nightmare. Each new piece of information was another stab to his already broken heart. The love he thought was real had been a deadly illusion. In the end, the jury took less than 3 hours to reach a verdict. Guilty, on all counts. Attempted murder, arson, insurance fraud. As the verdict was read, Jamie Lynn showed no emotion. She was sentenced to life in prison, with no possibility of parole. Justice had been served. The legal system had worked. But for Carter, sitting in the back of the courtroom, there was no sense of victory, just a profound and hollow emptiness. The woman he had promised to love and cherish for the rest of his life would now spend the rest of her life behind bars, a consequence of her own chilling greed. The months after the trial were the hardest. Carter's physical therapy was grueling, a daily battle to regain strength in his shattered leg. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the psychological wounds. Trust, once the cornerstone of his world, was now a foreign concept. He was surrounded by the support of his friends, his family, and his firefighter brotherhood. They rallied around him, offering everything from home-cooked meals to a shoulder to cry on. But at night, when the house was quiet, the silence was deafening. Every corner of the home they had shared was a reminder of the lie he had been living. Slowly, very slowly, he began to heal. He sold the house, unable to stay in a place filled with so many false memories. He moved into a small, simple apartment, a blank slate on which to build a new life. He started talking to a therapist, working through the deep trauma of the betrayal. It wasn't about forgiveness. It was about understanding that Jamie Lynn's actions were a reflection of her own darkness, not a failure on his part. He had to learn to trust his own judgment again, to believe that not everyone was hiding a terrible secret. One day, 6 months after the trial, he drove to Station 12. He wasn't sure if he could ever go back to being a firefighter. The job was tied to the worst day of his life. But as he walked through the familiar doors and heard the easy laughter of his crew, something shifted. This place wasn't the source of his pain. This place was where he had a purpose. This was his family. They didn't see him as a victim. They saw him as Carter, their brother, their leader, the hero who had survived. It was a long road, but Carter eventually returned to duty. He was changed, of course. A little more cautious, a little more somber. The easy smile didn't come as quickly as it used to, but when the alarm sounded, the old focus returned. He was still the one who ran in when others ran out. He had faced the fire, both literal and metaphorical, and he had survived. His story was no longer a story of betrayal. It was a story of resilience. A story of a good man who had walked through the darkest of valleys and found his way back into the light, stronger and more determined than ever.